Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I suppose, depending on where you are right now. Welcome to the CNO Roundtable. I'm really excited to welcome you all here today. My name is Louise Berguglio, and I lead the product team at Andros. You are now here for our fourth and final session in the series. We've been doing these every Tuesday. It's been a really wonderful series. We created this as a way to talk about some of the things that are top of mind for folks who are chief network officers or people who serve in those roles. And it's been really exciting, really fun. We started by talking about the need for the role of the CNO and where that's going, why we've been seeing it emerging more commonly as a role. We spent some time talking about the provider perspective in our second session. In our third session, we covered the member perspective. And so I'm really excited today that we're going to finish with something that's going to feel hopefully practical, hopefully exciting, hopefully give you some ideas that you can actually take in and implement in your own business. So the title today is Innovators in Action, Case Studies Shaping the Future of Provider Networks. Before we dive in to introductions and the content today, I just want to cover a couple of logistics. So you can ask questions, and we will make sure actually that we leave quite a bit of time at the end to handle those questions. There is a Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen if you just hit Q&A. I highly encourage you to pop in questions as they come to your mind. That way you won't forget them. And we will again kind of let them hang out in that panel, and then our speakers will address them at the very end. So let's go ahead and dive right in because I know I'm super excited to get started today. So first, our first guest, we have three of them today. Darla, would you be willing to share a little bit about your role, your background, and if you'd like a fun fact? And then we'll hear from Colin, and then we will hear from Mike.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Darla McGahee, Vice President of Network Development for ExoHealth. ExoHealth is a brand new PPO model that focuses exclusively on self-insured employer groups. We went live on January 1st of 2025 in 4 markets, Houston, Dallas, Atlanta, and Minneapolis. And my role at ExoHealth is to oversee the build out of our provider network in all 4 of our markets. And I have been building provider networks for the better part of 30 years and have worked with both smaller regional players as well as national players, and spent about 10 years building my own firm, building out provider networks and expansion markets for major payers, including HealthSpring, which eventually became Cigna, United, Amerigroup at the time, and also Centene, as well as lots of other smaller regional plans. Spent a little bit of time on the provider side along the way, working on the managed care contracting side of things with both an OBGYN practice and a primary care practice. I'm originally from Texas, originally from the Houston area, but recently transplanted to the Austin area to be closer to a lot of different lakes, and my family just really enjoys hanging out on the lake in the summertime.
Wonderful. And Colin.
All right, thank you. Hey guys, Colin Blaney, senior partner at HealthScape. We're a management consulting firm focused on the payer segment in the industry. We're also part of a larger consulting company called the Chartis Group, and together we focus on strategic growth, operational improvement, financial performance, those related initiatives across payers and providers. Across my 25-year career, spent a lot of time focused on different connection and collaboration points between providers and payers, both from a consulting standpoint, but also an internal stint at WellPoint Anthem, doing similar activities. That experience is not just in the traditional provider functional domain like contracting, credentialing, but if we broaden that definition a little bit more with prior authorizations and servicing and payment related aspects between payers and providers, and really looking at all those different collaboration points there. Last point is I also did a 6-year stint as a consultant at CAQH, which is an industry consortium that focuses on multiple things, but one of is provider data. So I've experienced there leading industry level work group sessions with leaders from different health plans, as well as developing some products and services related to provider data and credentialing. Some of the interesting things that I'm excited to go over today is really around provider data. If you can tell from my intro, I've spent a lot of time in provider data the last 15 years. And while there's been some incremental improvement, there's still a lot of big ways to go from a consistency and accuracy standpoint that I'm sure you're all aware of. Fun fact about me, I'm in the process of becoming a champion sunflower grower in the country's oldest agricultural fair here in Massachusetts, where I live. Last year was the first time I entered. I grew a 12-foot giant sunflower. Thought I was going to win. Came in fifth place. So, have a ways to go, more than 12 feet. So, fingers crossed. Michael, turn it over to you.
I don't know how I follow that. I am a colleague of Colin's, senior partner with HealthScape. I've been with HealthScape for a little over 12 years. Spent about 15 years in the healthcare industry. Before HealthScape was working for on the provider side on service line growth strategies and physician compensation modeling. Since I've been with HealthScape focusing on the payer segment, I've spent a lot of my time on network strategy, anywhere from working with payers to structure networks across market segments, do a lot of work on the contracting side, fee for service, and then on the value-based, I've done a lot of work in value-based model design and enablement. So I work with Colin, we're kind of hand in hand. I'm more on the strategy side, and then he's more on the data and technology enablement to enact all the strategic ideas and designs that we have. I am not a champion sunflower grower. I guess one quick fun fact: I am in a couple weeks about to take my family on a Southwest RV trip for the first time that lands in a dude ranch in Montana. My only frame of reference for a dude ranch in Montana is City Slickers with Billy Crystal. So I'm excited and a little apprehensive, but I'm looking forward to this conversation.
I was gonna say, I'm sure it'll be just like City Slickers, except probably I shouldn't wish that on you. Hopefully, it's nothing like City Slickers. Well, wonderful. I'm so excited to get into the content today. And I think, again, this is the last of the series. And this whole series, we've really been talking about how to do better with our networks, how to do better for members, how to do better for providers, and ultimately how to get better performing networks for everybody. And at some point, when you're talking about better performing networks, you're probably talking about value-based payment and value-based contracting, right? That kind of comes up regularly. And so, Mike, my first question is for you, because I know you've spent kind of a fair amount of your career helping different organizations figure out how to implement this or how to do better in terms of their VBC programs. I feel like we've also been hearing in the industry that it's kind of plateauing a little bit, right? And people are less and less sort of making these breakthroughs or these big changes. Do you feel like that's the case? And if you are seeing innovations and you are seeing kind of breakthrough models, where are you seeing those?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think on a macro level, many of our clients um, are experiencing a plateauing of the legacy models. And by plateauing, it refers to the diminishing incremental returns that our clients are seeing in their legacy, more PCP-oriented programs. In Medicare Advantage, where HMO products are more widely adopted, we still have, I think strong VBC participation in two-sided models. We've seen mostly independent medical groups that are very well integrated, and some systems perform well in managing total cost of care against an MLR premium target. But we are starting to see, particularly in the recent years, as the Medicare Advantage book of business deteriorates, a lot of our providers are kind of stepping away from risk, or at least dialing down the risk. And on the commercial side, where the models are, PPO products more dominate, the VBC programs are historically more trend-based. What we've seen is high cost providers those have adopted the models have maybe come down to a market median, but we're increasingly seeing the efficient providers really struggle to retain some sustainable value creation through participation in those programs. So I think the macro, lens to this is, we've been at this for, 10, in some markets, 15 years. I think that we've probably seen the bending of the trend that comes from the initial implementation of the existing models. And now those models are kind of shifting into more maintenance mode. They're becoming a day-to-day, factor of negotiations and provider operations. But the models by themselves are no longer going to create trend bending, cost trend bending that we really need. So from innovation standpoint, a couple things that we've seen in the market that we're working with our clients to address. One is around specialty VBC. So historically, value-based has really been oriented in enabling the primary care physician to be the quarterback to manage care. Increasingly, what we're seeing is the cost drivers are increasingly beyond the PCP's control. And so, it's becoming the specialist. In Medicare, as an example, utilization of specialists has far outpaced utilization of primary care. And it's becoming increasingly the role of the specialist that really dictates what drug regimen you're on, what your site of care is going to be. And for highly complex members, it's increasingly the specialist groups that are helping to mitigate, stabilize the member after a discharge and reduce readmissions. And so we're seeing a lot of interest in specialty VBC, cardiac, GI, MSK, nephrology, oncology to some extent, emerge as a layer on top of primary care. On the PCP side, we're also seeing a movement towards not just measuring a trend, this is particularly true in the commercial markets, but also creating models that provide sustainable levels of reward for efficient providers that have already low cost, but will continue to struggle to generate positive ROI simply from a trend-based model. And I think lastly, and probably a big thematic connection point, I hope, throughout this discussion is navigation. So for both the payer and the provider to be generating ROI in value-based reimbursement models and value-based programs moving forward, we feel increasingly that it's important for payers to take a much more active role in directing members, directing volume towards those providers that are performing well, that are efficient. Historically, value-based has kind of been a contracting decision, and it hasn't always well integrated with other functions of the plan that can direct volume. And increasingly, as we move into the specialty space, and as we see the kind of plateauing of incremental returns simply from participation, it's becoming increasingly critical for our payer clients to engage with product, with clinical, with multiple other technology, with multiple other functions to ensure that members are directed, either self-directed or guided towards providers that are really delivering efficient, high quality care.
Really good insight into sort of a broad sort of sense of how that VVC arc has kind of changed over 15 years. I'm curious, Darla, if we can do a little bit of a double click into the EXO business, because I know your business is really kind of wrapped around this idea of value-based arrangement with providers. Would you be willing to share with the audience a little bit about how that works and what makes it unique?
Yeah, and actually, Mike touched on a number of key features of our model. Our model at Exo Health features an episodes of care program where we have defined over 150 different condition and surgical episodes of care, and we've established fixed market prices for each one. This is a game that both PCPs and specialists can play, which is really important because historically a lot of value-based care models have focused a good deal on PCPs. So we've changed the script there and created an environment where specialists can get in on the action as well. In our model, we start with a fee-for-service chassis and then build in or layer in an episodes of care model on top of that. So as physicians are administering or are providing services, they're billing us as they would any other traditional PPO model. And then we're managing the episodes of care in the background to determine whether or not the physician practice has been successful in managing a surgical episode, for instance, under the market average. By setting our episode prices at the market average, there's no race to the bottom, and providers are not having to compete against their best self in order to be successful in our program. Instead, they just have to be better than the average. And in our market or our model, we're not asking them to take risk on things that are outside their scope of control or outside their scope of practice or even outside the episode scope. So if you have a hip replacement episode, for instance, that episode is triggered when the surgical claim is billed to us, and there's typically a 30-day look back and a 90-day look forward. And all services relevant and related to that episode are included in the episode cost. but it doesn't include things that are irrelevant to the hip replacement. It doesn't include a random bout with pneumonia or something that lands somebody in the hospital during their postoperative period for the hip replacement. So physicians aren't on the hook for things that they can't control. And like I said, they're competing against the market average, which is all the providers in their geographic market, the high cost providers, the low cost providers, the high quality, the low quality. They're competing against everyone and not trying to achieve their own best results. So it really flips the script. And I'd say a couple of other features that are important to our model is that we've just about eliminated prior authorization requirements. Not completely, but for a provider that's in our high performance network, there's only 5 or 6 different things that require prior authorization. So for instance, an air ambulance transport would require prior authorization. The idea here is that if you're asking physicians to take risk and be in the driver's seat on costs, then the plan should get out of the way and not put them through a bunch of administrative hoops and require them to request authorization from the plan on a variety of different things. And then another area that I feel we've been really innovative is that we pay our providers 100% of the contract rate at the time they submit their claim. There's no deduction for member cost share amounts. Instead, we collect the member cost share amount on behalf of the provider. And that accomplishes a couple of things. One is that the providers aren't in the business of having to chase down member cost share amounts. Our data suggests that providers spend about 45% in collections or trying to collect the amounts, and the bad debt, patients who never pay the bill is also an issue for them as well. And so it's kind of they're spending a lot to get a little bit of return. So we collect that for them and take on that risk on their behalf, and the physicians get paid in full from us. And then at the same time, the members don't have financial burden as a reason to not get the care they need. They have the opportunity to set up a payment plan with us and pay over time. The reason that matters in an alternative payment model is the last thing you want is someone to postpone or delay their care until the point it exacerbates, then seek care, and you've got your physician groups on the hook accepting risk on those patients when there was no need for their care to exacerbate in the first place. So we've eliminated financial barriers as a reason to not get care.
I really love that you thought through what the plan needs, what the providers need, and what the members need, and really put in policies in place to solve for all three. I'll also say I certainly had never heard of a plan taking on that financial risk around balance billing, right? If providers don't have to be responsible for collections, that's huge. That's huge. I imagine providers love that.
They really do. It's been something that they've been really excited about, especially those larger systems that are really challenged by this, and it's especially relevant with your members who have chronic conditions and have typically experienced larger cost share amounts. Patients who are having higher deductible plans, and it's difficult to meet those deductibles to get the surgery that they need.
Yeah, that's great. And certainly, again, everyone knows negotiation and contracting with the larger institutions, that can often be where the challenge is in creating a network. So to have a service that appeals to them so well, just kudos to you guys. I think that's wonderful. Um, so Colin, next question is for you. We've been talking a little bit about value-based care and kind of the plateauing and maybe the next wave of innovation that's needed. When you think about technology and then also data, what are some of the roadblocks that your clients tend to run into that hinder their progress? And then maybe conversely, what are some of the things giving you optimism? Where's some of the innovation coming from right now?
Sure. Great question. Yeah. And based on what Darla and Mike have already shared, it should be clear that it's not just a tech problem versus an organization problem, right? You have to solve for the organization and the model problem first, and then how technology solves for it. So two examples of that, one, that evolution to the VBC 2.0 that Mike alluded to, and then also the importance of eliminating the functional silos within a health plan, where a lot of the technology traditionally is oriented around supporting different functions, but concepts and models like this really need to incorporate how that's shared across different functions. So that's something that's new from an operations and technology standpoint. But some of the limiters, traditionally are just on that 2.0 model too. It's evolving, right? And models are being tried out and tested. And anytime that happens, It takes time for technology to catch up, especially with some of the legacy technology infrastructure that most health plans have in place that wasn't built for data sharing and analytics first and upgrade. It's built for transaction processing. So incorporating the analytics into the core platforms, not having them stand on the side, takes an effort and takes money and takes a multi-year commitment, and that sometimes is not, prioritized within plans. Um, Second is the fact with the carve outs that Mike mentioned as well, with the different CKD and MSK and carving out some of those models there separately. And there's a lot of vendor models that you can outsource that to, like we talked about, that don't include a health plan having to modify their internal technology. So, but need to integrate and share data and plug that partner into your technology stack. And that's something that's evolving and being tested out as well. One other roadblock is really around the data silos that I mentioned, but also the lack of true interoperability, which will be a theme today. You'll hear from me in talking about it. But really, if you think about value-based care, one of the fundamental aspects is really having that holistic view on the patient member journey across multiple care settings and over time. And right now, as an industry, we're behind still in true interoperability and EMR access. And there's a lot happening in the industry, both from a governance standpoint as well as what some of the EMR vendors and other vendors are doing in the space. But that has been a limiter as health plans have only gotten pockets of that clinical data plugged into different spots today and not really that true interoperability vision that's out there. From an innovation standpoint, I think it varies across different areas. If we think about VBC, right, we're talking about driving better outcomes, reducing admin burden to Darla's point about prior auths, eliminating some of those, enriching the provider payer relationships to be true partners, and then engaging the patient members to have a bigger role in the awareness about their health and more connectivity to the plan and provider. And there's different technologies that kind of handle all those different concepts that support VBC. So it's having to align all those with different sub strategies that roll up to an overall technology strategy. There's not one single innovation that would be a standalone.
That makes a lot of sense and certainly echoes things that we're hearing too. As I'm listening to kind of Mike and Darla talk about too, the kind of next wave of VBC being more focused on specialists, I imagine that'll even put added pressure on technology and data, because with specialty, right, comes a need for flexibility, right? MSK thinks about business and conditions this way. Cardiologist thinks about business and conditions this way. And like you, I've spent my career in technology. I know how challenging that can sometimes be, to really embrace that need for configurability or embrace that need to operate, one agreement this way and another agreement that way. So definitely can hear what you're saying, Colin. And I think that the innovations that are coming forward are going to be really critical to sort of changing the shape of that curve, like Mike was talking about. Quick question for you, Mike, actually, because in our prep session, you were talking a little bit about provider data as well, maybe more in the context of how challenging it can sometimes be to
Yeah.
really find those high performing providers and measure those high performing providers. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about, the challenges you're seeing there, as well as some of the solutions that are being put in place.
Yeah, for sure. And just editorial comment just to respond to the conversations already happening. Our philosophy is and Colin mentioned value-based 2.0. What that means to me is it's as an evolution of how we think about value from simply just a payment model. And now it's creating a more holistic value proposition for efficient performing providers to want to engage and participate, and they're going to get more rewards, more value from their participation. And what that means, and this is where I love kind of how XO is developing their model. It's got to be a three-legged stool. We focus so much on the payment, and how do you set your targets, and how are we sharing risk and sharing savings, but we haven't focused on an administrative side. And we need to create a value proposition for our truly high-performing providers to want to participate in our value-based programs, and that means more volume and less administrative burden. So I love the concept, and I think that we're going to see a lot more of this as national plans begin to reduce prior authorizations or find ways to eliminate prior authorizations. States are taking up mandates to kind of push plans to reduce prior authorizations. So we're going to see, I think, greater utilization of gold carding, right, is part of value-based programs, and historically those have been fairly interconnected. And the same thing with volume and navigation. It's not just enough to provide additional dollars, particularly when we get into specialty space. The additional volume is really where the high-performing specialists are going to truly derive value through their participation. And that's obviously where the rubber meets the road. That's the really hard part for particularly for our payer clients in terms of enacting that space. There's also a brief comment that you made around specialty VBC, and I couldn't agree more. Um, the joke is right around accountable care organizations. You've seen one ACO, you've seen one ACO, and that is largely true. However, they all operate off very common infrastructure. So there's very commonly accepted practices of attribution around what goes into total cost of care, around how you set targets. Every one it may be a little bit different, but there's shades of gray, similarity. But when you get into the specialty space, all of those kind of the processes, the mature capabilities that we have that we've applied to primary care, it's just a much more heterogeneous environment. And so there's going to have to be significant flexibility in how we contract and how we support those contracts. So sorry, I just wanted to kind of touch on the editorial comment piece of this because I really like where this discussion is going. You asked about how we actually then go step back and define who those high performing providers are. And the frustrating part is, from our vantage point, there really is no industry standard definition of how you determine a provider to be high performing versus his or her peers in the market. And it's equally as complicated analytically as it is political. I think some of the challenges that we see are around, most of the measurements of total cost of care, like Darla is outlining, have been episodic in nature. But historically, m many programs that we see are based off of more black box episodic models, proprietary episodic programs, where the providers lack the insight into, well, what really goes into that episode. And to Darla's point, if they're going to be measured, even in some kind of market-facing view of who's high performing and not, there's a level of scrutiny that needs to be applied, a level of buy-in that needs to be achieved, so that the physicians can say that's a fair barometer of my performance. And without the transparency into those episode of care models and what goes into an episode and how it's measured to make sure that it is based on clinically relevant criteria and not some obscure aspects of the episode that might be in the proprietary program. I think that's been one challenge. And the second challenge, and I think there's a question in the queue about this, is around quality measurement. And this has not been in any way a strength of the industry, particularly as it pertains to specialists. So we are really bad as an industry at looking at claims data to determine what specialists are high performing or performing well on quality. Um, the payer community is well structured to ingest and review claims and administrative HEDIS measures, but those are really poor barometers of quality performance. And so, in order for us to designate physicians as high performing, we need to significantly advance our understanding of what is clinically relevant from a quality perspective. How do you measure it? Increasingly, the measurement requires EMR integration and it requires additional data sources that our payer clients do not have established scalably. And so, it makes it very difficult to source the data and measure it at scale and include it as part of your quality-based programs. I'll also add that one of the other components that we all think of as quality, but infrequently shows up in value-based programs, but it needs to, is satisfaction, is the patient, the member satisfaction. And that is a very powerful data point that needs to get layered into the assessment of who is high performing, not just from an outcomes perspective, but from a service perspective as well. And so this is the journey that our payer clients are in the process of taking. All of them are advancing capabilities in these areas because it all informs, who is high performing and how you define that You need to define it in a market because the whole value is you're creating a carrot. You're creating a value proposition for physicians to aspire to be part of that preferred network, preferred grouping that has the volume, that has the administrative benefits. We need to create transparency about what the standards are.
I love that. Yeah, I agree. I completely agree with you on including the member voice there. I feel like patient-reported outcomes and patient-reported experience measures, one of the simplest innovations of the last 15 years, right? Ask the members, did you get better? Can you walk up the stairs now? Were you able to attend your grandkids' graduation? Darla, I'd love to actually hear a little bit from you on this same topic, just because actually it's one we haven't covered really deeply in the previous sessions. So tell us maybe a little bit about how XO is thinking about measuring provider quality in your organization. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Our model is really kind of a layered approach to the network where we have a broad fee-for-service network that gives us network adequacy and meets all the standards that employer groups are going to be looking for. And then from there, a subset of that broad fee-for-service network is our high-performance network. We have hand-selected these providers to be in our high-performance network. And so to do that, we've evaluated both quality and cost, which is very difficult to do on the quality side, as Mike mentioned. Understanding their quality and outcomes data is essential to figuring out who's going to be a good candidate for our model, because we are trying to establish providers that are already performing better than the market to be in our high performance network, as opposed to contracting with the entire universe of physician groups and then holding them accountable for risk and just hope for the best. So to that end, we have vetted a variety of different vendors from Health Quorum, Medical Motive, and Bold. We've looked at everybody to try to figure out who's doing the best job in terms of being able to measure quality. We ultimately did choose one partner to vendor with, one partner to work with, but the reality is that all of them are imperfect, that there's not a good gold standard for this at this point in time. So for that reason, we use that as a guide to get started in evaluating our physician targets, but then ultimately plan to switch to our own performance measures over time as we get up and running. So we'll be looking at 3 KPIs. One is quality. How are they doing with our patient population? Looking at quality measures and not HEDIS measures and not claim reported measures, but things that, like Mike said, we would receive from their EMR integration. The next would be those patient-reported outcomes. Did they get better? Are they experiencing less pain? Are they able to walk up and down the stairs? Things like that. And then lastly would be a referral management measure. Ultimately, the success of our model depends on the ability to drive more volume to that high-performance network and essentially shift care away from the higher cost, lower quality providers and shift it to our high-performance network. That's really where the sweet spot is, and it's where the savings occurs.
Thank you for sharing that about your business. That's really helpful. Colin, I want to give you a chance to chime in on something that Mike said. Both, Mike and Darla have talked about using new types of data, maybe including even clinical data into measuring quality. Mike talked about how, EMR integrations feel like they're a thing that's needed to really push this kind of into the new frontier. From your perspective, what are some of the challenges and opportunities around integrating that type of data or other types of data that are going to make measuring quality and performance more effective?
Yep, sure. So I think one of the big things we talk about with our health plan clients is EMR integration, clinical data exchange, interoperability, whatever you're going to call it. It's not just capturing the data, but it includes embedding it into the right workflows.
Mm.
And right now, a lot of health plans, not all, but many health plans still capture those pockets of data from their provider partners for different use cases at different points in time. So one could be, I need to pull charts for HEDIS, so I'm going to do that. One could be, I need clinical documentation for a prior auth, so I'm going to have a separate path to do that. Third could be claims attachments for clinical documentation, all kind of different ways to get information at different points across that life cycle. What is hopefully evolving for many of those plans is how to get a more integrated strategy for are plugging into their provider network from a plan perspective, and how to capture all that data in a cohesive way and then share it out to the different functions so that you can really embed it into the workflows. But that's really where the trouble is.
Hmm.
Getting the data is one thing, but then plugging it in is the other thing. So for that, there's a lot of vendor solutions out there, and I'm sure people on the phone have heard about things like Epic Pair Platform, but other EMR vendors have similar things where they provide access to clinical records in their EMR from a provider's network for the health plans. There's also APIs that are rolling out that right now might be immature and the data might not be the best flowing through it. But you look 5, 7 years down the road, what's that ecosystem going to be like with more available APIs that you can plug into that have high quality data in there? And then you also have the release of information vendors that have kind of repositioned over the last couple of years as clinical data exchange organizations, and not just pay per chart pull, but how do they plug into multiple EMRs and pull data for plans? And that's been evolving over the last couple of years. And then you also have HIEs out there that in different markets, they vary for what type of access they can provide a health plan. So that first step of like data acquisition, there's a lot of different options on there that health plans have to consider. Then there's ingestion inside the health plan. What do you do to ingest it? And then how do you use it and how do you plug it in? And all three of those areas are critical to think through. You can't just do the first one and get a bunch of data without plugging it in. You can't plug it in without the data. So all those different concepts involve technology, but it's not only technology focused.
Yeah, that completely resonates, Colin. And in particular, that last step to your point of actually getting the data in the right hands of the right people who can actually use it feels like it's often the last mile step, right? But sometimes that's where the gap is. It's, you know, having worked close to data myself, sometimes I feel like we spend a lot of time trying to protect the data, hoard the data, polish the data, get it perfect. But the truth is, sometimes even imperfect data can drive better business decisions than no data. So that last point of yours really lands with me. We, believe it or not, are past the halfway point, and I want to make sure we save at least 15 minutes for questions. We've got a few coming in, but I do have just a little bit more content I'd like to hear. So we've spent previous sessions talking a lot about providers. Darla, you certainly shared things that you're doing with providers in some of your earlier comments. But ultimately, members are really the reason we're doing this. The network, in many ways, is the product, right, that they want from that health plan. It ensures whether they can get the care they need. So, Darla, maybe you could just tell us a little bit also about some of the innovations or some of the unique things you're doing with the member in mind in terms of how you're designing your products and how you're designing your network.
Yeah, so ExoHealth is really addressing not just a payment model for providers, but really our founders took a step back and said, what's wrong with the status quo for providers? What's wrong with the status quo for members? What's wrong with the status quo for employers? And tried to address the fundamental problems for each one of those stakeholder groups. So just thinking about our episodes of care model, taking hip replacement as an example, and I'll just make up some numbers here, but when someone has a hip replacement surgery, there's a fixed market price for that surgery. That gives the employer price predictability. So they know, again, just making something up, they know a hip replacement in Atlanta, for example, is going to cost them $30,000 and not a penny more. But that also translates to price predictability for a member. The member in turn knows that my cost share amount is X% of the overall. So they know going into that $30,000 hip replacement exactly what their cost share amount is going to be, and there's no guesswork involved in that. I also mentioned a moment ago that we work with a vendor who collects member cost share for us. And that accomplishes a couple of things for the member. Number one is they have the opportunity for payment plans. And again, no postponing or delaying their care because of financial reasons, they can work out a payment plan. But also they have the opportunity to get one bill each month that represents all of the care they've received for that. So instead of having a surgery and just being flooded afterwards with bills from providers and being overwhelmed with all the paperwork that occurs after the actual surgical procedure itself, they get one bill that represents all of the services that they've had that month and their associated cost share amount. Member experience is also a key ingredient to our program. We have a care advocate team, and this is not your typical call center. This is not your typical call center where people are timed on how quickly they respond to each call and get off the phone. Our advocates have 15 or more years of experience in their line of work, and their focus is on truly helping members understand their needs, their care needs, and their social needs, and trying to develop a progressively personal relationship with those members over time. So that, yes, they can answer the simple questions about benefits and claims, but then they can also direct them to social resources as needed.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. Colin, would love to hear from you on this topic too. So actually, Mike kind of alluded to it actually at the very beginning of our conversation. Um, we can work really hard. Hopefully, we're all working really hard to create a really high performing network. Maybe we have great segmentation. We've separated our really high performing providers from our lower performing providers. But at the end of the day, we want members then to be able to access that in the way that ideally yields to the best outcomes for them. So where are places where you feel like there's interesting thing happening in network models and technology and tools that are really being leveraged to support members, the choices they're making, and the quality of care they're receiving?
Yep, sure. And like you mentioned, the first thing is a lot of these plans are designed in a way to take some of that off the member's burden, right? If
Hmm.
the networks are defined a certain way, that kind of navigation is already embedded in some of that
Hmm.
definition there, to
Yep.
steer towards the right providers and to whether it's the way that the provider directory is configured on the portal or the app, or referrals are processed, or scheduling appointments is narrowed down and catered for the member, but it's them in that experience and making sure they're looking for what's right for them in those situations. Second point is there's even more emphasis on a digital first ecosystem, to engage with members about their benefits, the network, what their experiences are, what they want from the health plan, all of that digital first engagement really helps both on the plan, the provider, and the member side to share that information that we talked about earlier there. And then Darla's point about the monthly billing, for example, there's differences like that not all plans do, but some plans do in these new spaces where the payment cycles are different and members having to get used to that and educating them and giving them the right tools to understand, what falls on them, what their expectations are from what they'll need to pay and whatnot. So different tools configured differently here, but that digital first aspect is key to this segment.
Yeah, and I think to your point, when you're working with members in a digital first way, that's creating even more data for the system, right?
Yep.
About what kinds of providers are members looking at in your directory, and can you actually start to use that as a predictive signal, right, of maybe how they might start actually using or the needs they might have from the network. So I think that's a really, really great point. Mike, would love to let you also chime
Yeah.
in on this topic. I know that's one that's kind of near and dear to your heart.
Well, I this is why I'm excited because what's transpiring here is traditional network strategies are now evolving to the point where what is required for success is really cross-functional capabilities that haven't necessarily been connected to our network strategies historically. And so that, I mean, it's exciting because what we will see is the leaders in this space are going to be driving that transformation quickly, and they're going to be coming out with differentiated products that are going to disrupt, make everybody take notice. I think for me, I'll build on what Colin is saying. I'm really enthusiastic about the technology applications that are just really making it not just easier for a member when they need care to find a preferred or high performing provider, but go so far as to help them to just get scheduled, take them all the way through. So it is really a hand-holding experience where you're walking the member almost into the physician office where you want them to go. That I think is critical. I'll also go back to referral optimization. Really encouraged to hear from Darla. You mentioned this as part of some of your one of the things you're measuring, right, as in your model. Um, we have not done a great job at going to our primary care physicians and some of the medical oncology specialists and arming them truly with an understanding of who really is high performing. I know that there are challenges in the market with disrupting legacy referral relationships, and particularly as we get more consolidated within systems. But there are payers that are really successful at going out and saying, these are the high performing specialists that I want you to refer to. And if you would have referred volume in the past to these physicians versus your existing, this is what your value-based incentive would have been. This is how you could have done better. It's going that extra mile to really demonstrate to the physicians what would value is truly derived from referral optimization. There's a lot of enhancement that we can all do in strengthening that capability as well.
I love that. Thank you. Well, want to make sure we have plenty of time to get to questions, but also want to very quickly give folks kind of last words. So if there's something that we didn't talk about, something that you're passionate about, any kind of final thoughts you want to leave our audience with, would love to hear from you. So Colin, anything top of mind that you want our audience to be thinking about?
Yeah, sure. And I'll go back to my points I made around that underlying chassis that I think Darla mentioned as well, on how all this is supported and the information, the data that's needed to support all these different cross-functional workflows that need to take place. And provider data overall is still a struggle for a lot of health plans, and between health plans and providers, and constantly looking for updates on whether it's basic profile information or some of the quality measures or how to measure quality. It's still pretty immature. So the way that we talk about it with health plans is to look at it from a maturity model perspective across 5 lenses, which only one of is really technology enablement. So technology enablement, data management, and governance is a key part in pulling the organization together. We did a provider data strategy last year where we brought together 40 different stakeholders across a health plan that had never really talked about provider data together before, and they each had their own different silos and definitions. And if you get down to the data level and try and look at the mappings of definitions, they're different across those different functions within the same plan. So you think about the limitations that puts on an organization being able to get to a single answer across those functions. It's impossible. So technology enablement, data governance, operational effectiveness in the different functions, provider member experience we talked about, and then regulatory compliance is a key part of provider data across the different segments there. So think about it from a building maturity over time instead of a silver bullet answer that's out there because people have been looking for that. It doesn't exist.
I love the call to action to break down the silos and bring everyone together to talk about it. I was almost going to ask you, Colin, I was thinking about it. I was like, how often do you think the people working on the Member 360 data initiative, right? It's almost always called Member 360, are
Yep.
talking to the people working on the Provider 360 data initiative and how much of that data could really be shared. We'll talk
It's
about that over beer next time you're in
yep.
town. Darla, final thoughts for the audience.
We've talked a lot about what payers are doing. We haven't really touched on what providers are doing. And I think there's a lot of exciting things going on out there. It's a new day for providers as well. There are a lot of providers out there seeking direct to employer opportunities. I've got orthopedic practices that are out there working with and contracting with their own upstream and downstream partners, establishing their own bundles, and then going out and marketing directly to employer groups and putting themselves out there on marketplaces like MDSave, Tendo, and so forth. For me, it's a lot of fun to partner with these types of groups that are innovative, where Exo Health is coming at it from an innovative lens, and then you've got provider groups that are also looking to change the status quo, do something different, and make some effective change there. So I really get excited working with these groups that are aligned with us in terms of making change in the market.
I think it's wonderful. We're excited about your business too. Wishing you
Thank you.
guys all the best and all these exciting innovations. Mike, final thoughts from you.
Yeah. Also share the excitement with what XO is doing. I mean, it's so philosophically aligned to what I think the industry need is. From my perspective, that what are the barometers of success going forward, and not necessarily the what we were striving to achieve, over the first 10 years of value based. Now, for me, what I've seen is, initially a lot of our clients focus on getting as many providers under value-based agreements as possible, shifting to the right, just moving the risk over. Those were some of the key measuring sticks by which many of my clients looked at their value-based programs, their network strategies, and also narrowing networks, and saying like these are the things that I want to be measuring leading indicators to make sure I'm successful. I don't believe that those are the right KPIs anymore. Not to, beat a dead horse or anything, but like to me, going forward, it is all about identifying the physicians that are truly outperforming in the market, delivering, and then creating that sustainable value proposition as XO is doing. Volume, admin, payment model, and then shifting care, using all the dials into playing the shift care. The winners over the next 5 years are going to be the payers and those that are going directly to employers that are best going to be able to achieve that shift. And it requires a lot of strategic commitment across multiple functions and requires a lot of data infrastructure and technology investment to get there. But there are multiple organizations, capability partners that are aggressively moving down the spectrum. Certain payers are aggressively moving down the spectrum. I think those are the key things that payers need to be measuring now to determine whether or not they're going to be successful in the next 5 years.
I love that. I think those are great final thoughts, and I'm sensing a pattern across all of these final thoughts, and really a call to action for maybe a little bit more ecosystem thinking. How do we think across business silos? How do we think across the payer, provider, and the member? How do we think across all of these specialties? And I think that's to your point, Mike, the people who can do that and start to do that well and to design the solutions that'll win, they'll find their businesses winning as well. So let's go ahead and pick up a couple of these questions. First one I'm going to send to you, Darla. So I think the person asking this question has experienced turning strategy into execution. And knowing that as difficult as sometimes the strategy and the contracting piece can be, sometimes where it gets really hard is when you have to operate your models. So they're specifically asking when you have a portfolio with all these different kinds of VBC agreements, maybe specifically if you think about TME VBC agreements, meanwhile you've got these episode of care VBC agreements. What are some of the tips? How are you coordinating all those different models to actually operationalize that?
We're pretty simple. We really are managing it through the episodes of care model. And then we also have an element of total cost of care, but that pertains primarily to services that fall outside of an episode of care. So we do have that element, but really the big headline for us is the episodes of care model and choosing that because of the inherent advantages. It gives the specialist an opportunity to participate. It puts the physician in the driver's seat of an episodic longitudinal care scenario. And so we're not trying to juggle, all of the different models out there at one time. Also, it's a simple model in terms of there's not a whole lot required of the provider. There's not a lot of administrative hoops that they have to jump through. I met with a group in Minnesota, big health system in Minnesota a few weeks ago, and his initial reaction to another value-based care model was, I have a whole department of people that have been hired to manage our VBC contracts. We do not have capacity to take on another one. And I was like, that's good news because we don't have an administratively burdensome program where you're going to have to hire people to close care gaps and do risk adjustment coding and so on and so forth. That's not part of our model. So it's really a matter of keep doing what you're doing today, and you'll be successful in the model.
That's great because to your point, that complexity of having multiple VBC models sits not just on the payer, it sits on the provider too. It's a
Right.
really great
Yeah.
observation, and I'm
Louise,
glad
if I
you
could
all.
also add to that, because from the payer perspective, this is a challenge that a lot of our clients raise
Mhm.
as well. My recommendation is don't let perfect get in the way of good. We've done a lot of the challenge here is this. We've now gone out and engaged a lot of our primary care physicians, either in MLR based or total cost of care TME type models, and now we're layering episodes. And how do we make sure we're not double paying? I think that's the challenge of rationalizing the portfolio concept. Most of the times when we've done this analysis, we have seen that their overlap is not as dramatic or as gray as you might think, in the sense that many of the members that are getting they're going through kind of traditional episodes don't necessarily overlap, with PCP attributed lives. But when they do, you have a couple options. One is going to be, and I think best in class is to reconcile, to take the incentive dollars that ultimately might accrue to the specialist and fold it into as and treat it as true medical costs for the member. That's really a mature programmatic response and requires that you have a lot of volume, and you intentionally structure your episodic care model so that you can best kind of reincorporate those dollars into the TME without further delaying the reconciliation, which already takes kind of too long the following year. But it becomes really necessary when you are directing a lot of volume into those episodes. But before you do that, many of our clients kind of look at the analysis that we've derived and say, you know what, we could reconcile, but in the near term, we're just not going to do it. We'll deal with a little bit of double payment for a lot of administrative ease. And as we start to get more volume, into our episode program, we'll then go through the reconciliation process.
I love that approach. Very practical. That's great. Quick question headed your way, Colin. I think someone is sensing, right? They're kind of saying, well, what happens once a provider is selected, right? So they've been selected as sort of a high quality provider. Ideally, we want their experience to be great, right? We've said you're one of our best. We want to kind of relieve your burden. However, to this listener, it's sounding like we may actually want to turn around and say, do you have technology in place to share data? Do you have da da da? So I think they're really asking what's needed from a provider once they're selected. Do they need to have a lot of technology? Do they need to be prepared to share a lot of data? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think that the data sharing exists already before they get selected because it feeds into the model for
Hmm.
becoming a high performing provider to that point across the different areas that Mike talked about earlier. From an experience standpoint, if once they are on the list, some of the technical implementations of that are on health plan portals, showing up in a different spot with different stars and emojis and quality rankings, and each health plan is kind of doing it differently. I was at a conference last week where I saw a pilot within Epic on the provider side when referrals pop up. That information is there for the provider to know which ones are high performing providers at the point of referral. So there's a lot of those types of technology implications of being in the network and how to kind of stay in that ranking there. But it's all based on the underlying cost of care, quality, administrative burden. Like we said earlier, though, every plan is kind of defining that differently. So as long as that information is making it through, whether it's with HEDIS scores for quality or other means that the health plan is doing, that information should continue to flow through. If it's not, then it's hard to measure to see if they're a high performing provider.
Yep. Great. Well, I can't believe it. Time flies when you're having fun. This was a great conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. But it is now time to wrap up our final session here on the CNO Roundtable. So for our audience, I certainly hope that you have enjoyed this and all of the sessions. Big thank you for this really exciting, really smart, very generous panel who was so wonderful in sharing their ideas and their tips with all of us here. Just know that we will be posting this video as well as a blog post summary on the Andros website. If you also have any questions for the panelists or questions for Andros, you can always reach out to marketing@andros.co. Super big shout out and thank you to our marketing team too, who has set up these events to run so flawlessly. There will be a survey at the end. I want to make one last plug for that. We do pay attention to your feedback. We do hope to run sessions like this in the future. So please let us know what you found useful as well as what you would like to see in the future. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful rest of your week. Thanks again, panelists.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.